And obviously as someone who's grown up with computers, it's much different, but I can only imagine if I did not have a computer and I spent 10 years like preparing it, you know, with a board, with paper, like talking to other people in a close circle, and then you play it at the board and your opponent just beats you like this. There are few things I can think of in chess that would be more demoralizing. I believe this is the first time that Frank James Marshall, the United States chess champion many times, someone who did a lot for the game of chess in the US, had the opportunity to play his most famous gambit, the Marshall Gambit, against Capablanca. So the Marshall attack, to be clear, well, we'll just go through the game. It's e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop to e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castle, c3. Now this is a very standard position. This has been played many times ever since this game. But the story goes that Frank James Marshall waited about 10 years in order to spring this gambit, and he decided he was specifically not going to use it against anyone else except Capablanca. He wanted to play it against the absolute best. He wasn't going to use it in any other games. So he waited 10 years. Now I don't know if the story is true, but that's you know, legend has it was 10 years. He saved this for 10 years to play this opening. Nowadays the Marshall Gambit is played at the top level of chess. It is considered a very solid opening, and even now it's playable. So this is a very solid opening, but these are the origins of it. It's a very famous game. Was this Marshall guy bought? Did this Marshall guy buy the Jan Gustafsson course? Frank James Marshall was alive long before Jan Gustafsson. But anyway, the point is he waited 10 years to play this. Now pawn takes pawn is played. Knight takes d5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5. Now again, this was the very first game that was played in the Marshall Gambit, or the Marshall attack, and here Marshall played knight f6. Now with modern day theory, we've come to the conclusion that knight f6 is not the best move. That c6 is the main line these days, and the reason is that Marshall had the right idea conceptually of moving the bishop and the queen, but when you go knight f6, it's a little bit too slow objectively. So he had the right concept behind the gambit of using the bishop and the queen, but the wrong sort of idea with knight f6. So the correct move here is c6, and the reason it's correct is, first of all, you keep ideas with bishop d6 and queen h4 alive. Secondly, you have options to jump with your knight to f4, which is really critical in this position. And then third, additionally, you keep this diagonal closed. So when you play knight f6 here, you open up this long diagonal for the white bishop to attack towards the black king on g8 here. So c6 is what Marshall plays, or not what Marshall played, but the main accepted line here. Instead, Marshall plays knight to f6. Now rook to e1 is played here by Capablanca. Marshall plays bishop d6. Again, right idea here to develop the bishop and the knight. Right idea to develop the bishop and wanting to play like knight g4 and queen h4. Again, very early days of this opening, and Capablanca plays pawn to h3. Again, with modern theory, we now know that d4 is a better move, and objectively, black does not have enough counterplay for being behind by this one pawn here. But anyway, h3 is played here by Capablanca. Marshall goes knight to g4 here. Queen to f3 is played by Capablanca. Again, you can try to take the pawn. I suspect that this doesn't work, because after queen h4, there are a lot of threats here. You're attacking with the bishop and the queen, d6 and h2. Queen h2, you have bishop g4, ideas to go rook e8. And you'll notice in this position, when you look at this, white has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces on their original squares that are kind of not in the game. So even though black is up, even though black is down one piece, the white king is very vulnerable, because white has not developed any of these. I mean, the rook is developed, but still these pieces are not active at all. You have 5 pieces that are not really developed, and you have one lone bishop that is on a good square. So it's a very overwhelming attack here for black. So instead, Capablanca plays queen f3, which is the best move. Again, you also have to be very careful here, because there also is the threat that, let's just say you play d4, bishop h2, you cannot go king to h1, because after knight takes f2, you're going to get your king and your queen forked. So you do have to be very careful. So Capablanca plays queen to f3 here. Logical move, the idea being that, let's just say black moves a rook here. You now can take the knight, because after queen to h4, you very calmly move the queen to h3. Your pawn supports the queen, and now all these threats with the queen and this bishop go up in flames. It's just like poof, because there's just no attack. You move the queen away, I push my pawn, very quickly bring my pieces into the game here. So queen f3 is a very good move. So now Marshall plays queen to h4, continuing with the theme of trying to attack, understanding correctly that he's down a pawn here and he really needs to attack very quickly, because if white can just get the development finished, white is going to be winning the game. So now Capablanca plays pawn to d4. Again, not queen takes a8, for example, because queen takes f2, knight protects the queen, king to h1, and queen takes e1 is checkmate. King cannot go anywhere. Additionally, you cannot take the knight on g4, because now black has several ways to win. I'm gonna is it bishop 8? I mean, computer says bishop h2. I think bishop g4 is also strong, but bishop to h2 check, king to f1, bishop takes g4, you move the queen, I don't know, like to c6, and now there are many ways. Like black can just go bishop d6, for example, and you're basically getting checkmated here. You again have no development. You have a queen that's wayward. You have a good bishop on b3, I guess, but again, these four pieces are not really functioning, and your king is extremely vulnerable here. So instead, d4 is played by Capablanca. Additionally, it opens up the diagonal for the bishop to be developed, but it also prevents black from jumping to e5 with the knight here, because the pawn controls the center, controls the square on e5. So now Marshall plays knight takes f2. Capablanca goes rook e2. Not queen takes f2, by the way, because after queen takes f2, black has a very strong move, bishop to h2. To be very clear, black does not go. You probably wonder, why can't black go bishop g3 and win material on this diagonal here? And the reason that this does not work is because now white has the very nice move, queen takes f7 check, and after black takes the queen, you go rook to e8, and this is actually checkmate, because you cannot block with the rook, because then that would put your king in check from the bishop, and you have no way to come up. So it's like a back rank checkmate, and the game is over here. But black can play bishop to h2 check first, so black has a little tickle here. If you move the king over, or if you take the bishop, black will just recapture your queen on f2. So when you go king to f1, black can now go bishop g3, and you cannot play queen takes f7 check here, because when I take your queen, you don't have time to make the checkmate because your king is in check. So you can't actually sack the queen here, which is why this tickle check is important, because now the king is not here, it's on f1, so your king will be in the line of fire if you take on f7. That being said, I suspect that after a move like queen d2 or queen to e2, white remains a little bit better here, although it's very scary. And understandably for Capablanca, it's very easy to be like, well, if I go queen d2 or I go queen e2, I still don't have development here. You have to worry about things like bishop d7 and rook e8, maybe even bishop h3 here. So very understandable that Capablanca does not go for this. Instead, he plays rook to e2 here, sidestepping it, but sidestepping the diagonal attacks with, like, for example, say you were to move a knight here, there's knight takes h3 with this fossilization of the rook on e1 from the queen on h4. So rook e2 is very multifunctional. First of all, you keep the rook on the open file. Secondly, you avoid these weird tricks where it's on dark square. Third, this diagonal becomes a little irrelevant in terms of putting the bishop on g3. So now here Marshall goes bishop to g4, again trying to go all in and attack Capablanca at all costs. So Capablanca captures the bishop, again pretty important. If you take the knight here, there's bishop to g3. If you move your queen, let's say f1, you trade, and black goes rook to e8, and again you're really struggling here. You have three pieces that are not in the game, and it's basically winning for black. So instead, h takes g4 is played here by Capablanca. Marshall goes bishop h2, Capablanca goes king f1, and Marshall plays bishop to g3 here. The idea once again is that black is threatening checkmate on h1 with the queen, and your rook is really in the way here. So Capablanca takes the knight on f2, queen to h1 is played by Marshall, king to e2 played by Capablanca, and now Marshall takes the rook. Black could maybe try to take this bishop on c1, but after queen takes g3, queen takes b2, you'll notice that in this position after knight d2, queen takes a1, white is much better here for a plethora of reasons. I think quite simply queen takes c7 is good. There might even be other moves, like you could even maybe just move your king to d3 and c2 very quietly. So white is very safe and all the pieces are developed, while black's rooks are now not doing a great job here. So instead Marshall takes. Capablanca goes bishop to d2. Marshall plays bishop h4. And now this is where, again, the thing that I would highlight that's really important is the understanding of these players, and especially of the world champions at the time, Capablanca and of course Aliekin and everyone after him, is what you need to do, like understanding these fundamentals. Like in this position, white has a bishop and knight for one rook, but at the same time the rook and the knight are not well developed, and the king here is very vulnerable on e2. So queen to h3 is played by Capablanca, correctly understanding that in the long run the bishop and the knight will be worth more than the one rook, but you need to get queens off the board first. So rook a8 is played by Marshall here. Capablanca goes king to d3. Marshall plays queen to f1. Again, very logical, checks the king, and keeps queens on the board, importantly, because if you go to like g1, for example, I take your bishop, and now three juicers is worth a lot more than one rook. So queen f1, king c2 here. Marshall goes bishop f2. Capablanca plays queen f3. Another very nice move, pinning the queen and the bishop, also putting a lot of pressure on this f7 pawn as well. So now queen g1 is played by Marshall, and now Capablanca plays from this point on. These moves are pure class from Kappa. So he plays bishop to d5. So what is the reasoning behind this move, you could say? Well, because it looks like it's not really doing a whole lot. And the reason it's such a good move here is because your rook and your knight are still very kind of misplaced, and you need to get them into the game. I mean, mind you, there probably are many ways to win here, but bishop d5 is the start of a plan that Capablanca has in mind to free the knight and free the rook. So now pawn to c5 is played here by Marshall. Capablanca plays pawn takes pawn. Now Marshall plays bishop takes c5. So Capablanca plays pawn to b4, attacking the bishop on c5. Marshall goes bishop d6, and now here Capablanca plays pawn to a4. And the reason this is so strong is because what you understand here is like what Capablanca understood correctly is that at this point the knight is actually quite secure here. Your king is always guarding it. So while you ordinarily would like to get the knight into the game, you can actually just use your king to protect the knight and rip open this a file so that your rook can come into the game, because if your rook gets down to like a7, for example, there are all sorts of threats. So a5 is played here by Marshall, and I think Marshall correctly understands that in this position there's just not much he can do here. He's in really bad shape, and it's just a bad position. It's objectively lost. So he goes a5. So Capablanca takes on b5, Marshall takes on b4. And here Capablanca, again, another very nice move. Not the absolute best move per se, in terms of like pure preciseness, but he goes rook to a6. And again, Capablanca correctly understands that the king protects the knight. The knight is very secure here, and also there are quite a few pieces in front of the white queen. After pawn takes, knight takes, you'll see the king is very safe here. Black cannot use the queen to get near this king on c2, and also the c file is kind of, it's temporarily open, but it will be closed very shortly. So bishop to b4 is played by Marshall. Again, you don't want to lose your bishop on d6. So now Capablanca goes b6, and you'll see there's just no way to get to the white king. The white king is extremely safe here with the bishop and the knight protecting it. So bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, and even though it looks like there should be some way to get at this king, you really can't. The queen covers the e2 square. This queen does, none of these squares on this back rank are available to the queen. So this king, in fact, is extremely safe here with this bishop and queen protecting it. And additionally, this passed pawn is the distraction that forces black to have to be worried about it from getting to the end of the board, and ultimately this is just winning. So h6, b7 played by Capablanca. Oh, also, you guys, rook e3 is not a move either. You would love to play rook e3, but it walks into the same checkmate. Queen takes f7, rook f7, and now rook to a8, and it's the same problem. After rook e8, you cannot block with your rooks. That would put your king in check from the bishop on d5, and so it's the end of the game. Instead, h6 is played by Marshall. Capablanca goes pawn to b7. Marshall plays rook to e3. And so here Capablanca now goes bishop takes f7, and the game ends. The game ends because if Marshall captures the bishop with the rook, white now makes a second queen on b8. If you move the king to h8, white has a very nice resource. Rook takes h6, which is checkmate again. King cannot go over because the bishop covers it. Pawn cannot take because then this bishop on c3 will capture the king, and the king cannot go up because the rook will capture, and so it's checkmate. And so he resigns. Additionally, king h7 is the only retry, but it leads to the same thing. You go queen f5. If g6, queen g6 is checkmate, and if you go king h8 again, rook takes h6, no way to capture because it puts the king in check from the bishop on c3. And so Capablanca wins this game here. Marshall does resign after bishop takes f7. And so what's kind of the what's the theme of this game? I think you know, I don't have a set theme per se from this one, but what I would say is, first of all, it shows how amazing Capablanca is, because Frank James Marshall spent 10 years saving this gambit. This was the first game ever played. He spent 10 years saving it, and then he lost. And I would say in many ways it's a pretty harsh loss too. It's a pretty brutal game in terms of the way that he lost it. So I think it's pretty remarkable that you see how strong Capablanca was. But I would say the main thing is it shows how well Capablanca understood the themes, even though of course he was figuring out on the fly. And the fundamentals here, especially like understanding the way that he needed to, you know, develop the bishop, run the king over, and especially I would say this bishop d5 move was really an all-star move. Just understanding that he goes b4 and a4, and actually his king is just very safe, very tucked away on c2, and it's just completely winning for white. So one of these games that, I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, obviously as someone who's grown up with computers, it's much different, but I can only imagine if I did not have a computer and I spent 10 years like preparing it, you know, with a board, with paper, like talking to other people in a close circle, and then you play it at the board and your opponent just beats you like this. There are few things I can think of in chess that would be more demoralizing, because it's very rough.